Today we're going to go over a classic programming problem, which I call the square of squares. It's a problem in which we print a image on a screen. All right, well here's the problem specification. Given positive integer n, create an n by n square consisting of equally sized shapes. The shapes in our case are going to be squares themselves. Okay, so here, to sort of clarify that, here's an example. N we allow to be an arbitrary positive integer. In this case, we're going to say 3. And what we're going to do is print an image that's built up of smaller images. Okay? And in our case, since n is 3, we're going to print 3 rows of squares. And each row, in turn, consists of 3 individual squares. All right, so here you can see on the top row 3 squares, second row 3 squares, third row 3 squares, for a total of 9 squares. Am I over explaining this? Okay, anyway, you look at the large image and it looks like a square. Okay, or if we bump up into 4, that now means we make 4 rows of 4 squares. Okay, obviously resulting in 4 rows and 4 columns. Okay, 16 total squares. All right, well, how do we do this programmatically? We're going to use the canvas that we talked about in our last lecture. But in the meantime, how do we get 16, if n is 4, how do we get these 16 squares in this pattern? Well, let's start with a simpler problem. Let's start with just printing a single row. That should be pretty easy if we knew how to print a square. Okay, assume in your mind at this point, just assume that instead of printing squares, we're printing like a single character, like the @ sign or some letter. All right, and we wanted to print 4 of those or 5 of those or n of those, or n is arbitrary, right? Well, you know that we should be trained at this point to know that that's what a loop does, right? If we don't know how many of them we're going to print, and we want to print that unknown number, we can just write a loop and do it one step at a time, right? All right, and the loop would look something like this, right? We would say, for let I get 1, I is less than or equal to n, I plus plus. So I would keep running through. When I is 1, we print a square. When I is 2, we print a square, etc., 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 until we hit n. At that point, we would have printed n squares. Okay? Let's just trace through it. So n is still 4 in our example. The loop will start I at 1. When I is 1, 1 is less than or equal to 4. So we jump into the loop and we print a square. At the end of the loop, as we know, our progress towards termination executes, in this case I plus plus. And so I will go up to 2. And then once again, that means that we will print another square because we'll go into the loop. Let's print a second square. I plus plus at the end of the loop, I goes up to 3. That means 3 is less than or equal to n. Jump in again, print a square. Now, I plus plus brings I up to 4. 4 is still less than or equal to 4, so we print a 4th square. We I plus plus at the end of the loop. I is now 5. When we get to that test, I is less than or equal to n. I5 is not less than or equal to n4, and so that's when we quit the loop, and we have a beautiful row of squares. Easy, yeah? Okay. So we know how to print a row of something, okay? Now, let's take it the next step and print the whole square of squares. Okay, well, really, if we know how to do this, and we just demonstrated that we do know how to do this, but let's say we can abstract that whole process into a single step. All right, and so instead of having a loop that says print 1 at a time, let's just make one sort of pseudocode statement that says print a whole line of squares. Well, if we had that, then to print our square of squares, it would just mean printing 4 lines of squares, and then we'd be done, right? Do you see that that's the same problem as we just went through, right? But instead of printing a single square at a time, we're printing a line of square at a time. So check it out. Let's just change that inside of the same loop and say print a line of squares. All right, just tracing through this, I'll do it a little bit faster this time, but we say, okay, the loop says I starts off as 1, 1 is less than or equal to 4, so we jump in, print a line of squares. Boom. Okay, then I bumps up to 2, I plus plus, 2 is less than or equal to 4, print a second line of squares, I goes up to 3, print a third line of squares, I goes up to 4, print up a fourth line of squares. Now I will go to 5 and the test will fail, ending the loop. But that's cool, that's when we wanted to stop, right? Now we have 16 squares in the correct pattern. And we completed the exercise easily. Okay, as long as we know how to print a line of squares. All right, now we can't leave the code like this and have it execute correctly because, even though we know what's going on, the JavaScript interpreter needs to have specific instructions about how to do this. Well, it's pretty easy though, because we, that red section now, print a line of squares, we went through the exercise. That's just a loop in itself. So what we can do now is replace that red line with the actual loop that we looked at before. And in essence, have one loop nested inside of another loop. Okay, it's called a nested loop, and that's how we complete this problem. Take a look. Okay, still n being 4. What we're going to do is write an outer loop, let I get 1, I is less than or equal to n, I plus plus. We'll build another loop inside of that. We have to change the control variable from I to j, but with the same pattern. And now, inside that loop, we print a square as before. All right? That's it. Now, what we call the outer loop, that's the one with control variable I, executes one at a time. Each time it executes, the inner loop executes one at a time. And so when I is 1, j will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I will be 2, j will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., each time printing a square. We should come up with the same pattern that we were talking about. Okay, very well done. Now, for some of you, this explanation will make perfect sense, and you're good at this point, okay? If that's not the case, if this is still a little bit fuzzy, then I have a few more videos after this one that go into more detail. We'll trace through this program and take a look at a few more things to kind of see what's going on, all right? So if you're in that boat, if you don't quite see what's going on yet, you are probably in the majority, okay? But if you do, fully get it at this point, you can skip the next couple of videos and go directly to the video that's called a statement execution count and pick up from there.